The Allies promised to hunt down every last Nazi war criminal, but they missed the worst one. While the world hunted for ghosts, the man directly responsible for the deaths of 400,000 people was living a quiet, suburban life just a few miles from the CIA's headquarters. He barbecued with his neighbors, coached the local soccer team, and for 34 years, no one knew they were living next to the Angel of Death. Imagine a scene painted by the devil himself upon the fractured canvas of human history. At the center of this canvas, awash in gray ash and blood-red sunsets, stands a figure. He is not a stooped, hideous goblin from a nightmare, nor a caricature of a villain with a crazed leer, but a tall, stately man with an impeccable posture. His SS uniform fits him as if it were molded to his frame, custom-tailored by the finest artisans, and his boots are polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the crimson sky above the camp. He wears snow-white gloves, and one hand clasps a thin riding crop, not for punishment, no, but rather like a conductor's baton, with which he directs this orchestra of death. He whistles an aria from a Wagner opera, and this melody, a symbol of high German culture, drifts over the barracks, mingling with the scent of soot and despair. This is Josef Mengele in his kingdom, Auschwitz. And that smile, that chillingly ordinary evil, is our first and most crucial key to understanding his nature. He was not a creature of darkness in its primitive storybook sense. He was a product of the light of science, of culture, of civilization, which, refracted through the warped mirror of ideology, birthed a monstrous shadow. Josef Mengele held not one, but 2 doctorates, one in anthropology from the prestigious University of Munich, the other in medicine. He was a man deeply immersed in the mysteries of the human body, in genetics, and in the laws of heredity. His mind, honed by years of academic study, was as sharp as a scalpel. He could discourse for hours on Kant's philosophy, quote Goethe, and admire the pure lines of classical statues. His colleagues at the camp remembered him as polite, courteous, almost gallant. He was what one in polite society would call a brilliantly educated young man with a great future. And this was not a mask in the usual sense. He sincerely believed in the values he professed, in science, in progress, in the greatness of his nation. But it was precisely this faith, multiplied by absolute power and a complete absence of moral restraint, that transformed him into the Angel of Death. Here he is, standing on the railway ramp where trains arrive daily, carrying thousands of condemned souls. To them, he is a deity, deciding their fate with a single flick of his hand, a wave of his crop to the left, and you are sent directly to the gas chamber, a wave to the right, and you are granted another day, another week, perhaps another month of slave labor and slow decay. He performs this task with the air of a weary gardener sorting seedlings. There is no anger, no rage in his eyes, only a cold, almost scientific curiosity. His gaze scans the crowd, searching for interesting material for his research. He spots a pair of twin children holding hands. The smile on his face widens. He approaches them, his voice soft and cloying. He offers them chocolate, strokes their hair, and promises that they will now be cared for. Their mothers weep with relief, unaware that they have just surrendered their children to an executioner for whom they are nothing more than lab rats in his monstrous vivisection. This is the first emotional hook, which catches not only his victims, but also us, as we try to comprehend his phenomenon. How could a man capable of a tender gesture in the next moment condemn someone to unimaginable torment? This paradox is the heart of his story. He was not a sadist in the pure sense, deriving pleasure from the physical suffering of others. His cruelty was of a different, far more terrifying nature. It was rational, calculated, and cloaked in the guise of science. He did not simply kill, he experimented. He injected typhus into the bloodstream of one twin to see how long it would take for the other to die. He sewed veins together, changed eye colors with caustic chemicals, and infected people with deadly diseases to surgically document the stages of their agony. He did all this not on a maniacal whim, but with what he saw as a clear purpose: to unlock the secrets of the Aryan race, to learn how to control birth rates, to create superhumans. He saw himself not as a murderer, but as a pioneer, a scientist on the front lines of the battle for his people's future. And this conviction in his own righteousness made his crimes not merely horrific, but utterly infernal. He turned the most humane of all knowledge, medicine, into its bloody, monstrous negation. He was nicknamed the Angel of Death, not for his cruelty alone, but for this diabolical duality, for his angelic appearance and his deadly deeds, for his ability to speak tenderly to a child whom, an hour later, he would send to an operating table without anesthesia. That smile, which many survivors recalled, was not the grimace of a villain, but the sincere smile of a man satisfied with his work. He was an artist who had found his unique, nightmarish medium. His laboratory in block number 10 was his workshop, and the mutilated bodies of prisoners were his grotesque masterpieces. When the Red Army approached the gates of Auschwitz, he did not flee in a panic like so many others. He carefully packed his protocols, his notes, his scientific trophies, collections of human eyes, tissue samples, skeletons, and calmly departed. He believed his work was not yet finished. For him, this was not the end, but merely a temporary retreat. The monster took off his white coat, donned the gray greatcoat of the Wehrmacht, and vanished into the chaos of the collapsing Reich, taking his smile and his terrible secrets with him. To understand how this gifted Bavarian boy grew into the architect of hell, we must return to the very beginning, to the place where, in the green meadows of Günzburg, the story of a future executioner began. Before the ash and the barbed wire, there was the gentle murmur of the Danube. Before the screams, there was the chiming of church bells on a Sunday morning. We must travel back to a place of profound and deceptive peace, to the small Bavarian market town of Günzburg. It lies nestled in a verdant landscape, a postcard of German prosperity and order, its cobblestone streets and half-timbered houses breathing a history that feels ancient and unshakable. Here, life flowed with the predictable rhythm of the seasons. It was a world of devout Catholicism, of respect for authority, and of an unyielding belief in the virtues of hard work. In this seemingly wholesome soil, a seed of unimaginable darkness was planted and carefully nurtured. For it was here, on the 16th of March in the year 1911, that Josef Mengele, the eldest of 3 sons, was born into a world that promised him everything. His was not a childhood of deprivation or cruelty, quite the opposite. The Mengele family was the uncrowned royalty of Günzburg. His father, Karl Mengele, was a formidable figure, a self-made man who had built an industrial empire from nothing. The company, Karl Mengele and Sons, manufactured state-of-the-art farm machinery, its name a byword for German engineering and reliability. He was a stern, ambitious patriarch who ruled his family and his business with an iron will. The true power in the household, however, was his wife, Walburga. She was a woman of icy authority, deeply religious, yet fiercely materialistic, her domineering presence casting a long shadow over her sons. From his father, Joseph inherited a relentless drive and ambition. From his mother, a cold detachment and a profound sense of entitlement. He grew up in an atmosphere of privilege, insulated from the economic chaos that roiled the Weimar Republic. The family was wealthy, respected, and powerful. They lacked for nothing. Young Joseph was the golden boy. By all accounts, he was a handsome, charming, and exceptionally bright child. He was popular in school, a leader among his peers, his manners polished, and his smile disarming. He was not a brooding outcast or a troubled loner nursing secret grievances. He was the epitome of a well-bred German youth, excelling in his studies and radiating a quiet confidence. Yet, beneath this placid surface, a restless ambition churned. The path laid out for him, to one day inherit and run the family business, felt too small, too provincial. His father had conquered the world of machines and commerce, but Josef yearned for a different kind of dominion. He was drawn to the world of ideas, to the hallowed halls of academia, where prestige was measured not in Reichsmarks, but in intellectual authority. He dreamt of a legacy built not on iron and steel, but on flesh and blood. This ambition led him away from Günzburg and into the intellectual ferment of Germany's universities. The 1920s and early 1930s were a time of radical, intoxicating ideas. In the wake of the Great War and the humiliation of the Treaty of Versailles, a generation of German thinkers was searching for answers, for a new path to national greatness. The burgeoning fields of anthropology and genetics seemed to offer a key. They spoke of heredity, of racial purity, of a biological destiny that could be scientifically understood and, more importantly, controlled. For a young, ambitious man like Mengele, this was an irresistible siren call. Here was a science that promised not just knowledge, but power, a science that could explain the world and provide the tools to reshape it. His intellectual journey found its focal point at the University of Munich, a bastion of conservative thought and a breeding ground for the nascent Nazi movement. It was here that he found a mentor who would change the course of his life, Professor Theodor Mollison, a leading figure in physical anthropology. Mollison was a respected academic, but he was also a fervent believer in eugenics and racial hygiene. Under his tutelage, Mengele's vague nationalistic sentiments began to crystallize into a coherent, scientific worldview. This was the crucial emotional hook, the intellectual turning point. His prejudices were no longer mere feelings. They were now legitimized by the authority of science. He wasn't just a patriot. He was a biologist on a quest to decipher the very code of racial superiority. For his doctoral dissertation in anthropology, completed in 1935, he undertook a meticulous study of the racial differences in the structure of the lower jaw. It was a dry academic exercise, but it laid the foundation for the horrors to come. He had learned to look at human beings not as individuals, but as collections of biological traits to be measured, catalogued, and judged. Having conquered the world of anthropology, he turned to medicine, earning his second doctorate in 1938. He was now Dr. Josef Mengele, a man of formidable intellectual standing. He was polished, brilliant, and armed with an ideology that gave him a sense of purpose and destiny. The idyllic world of Günzburg, with its church bells and prosperous calm, had produced its perfect son. But that world was already fading, consumed by the rising tide of a new, brutal order. Mengele stood at a crossroads. He could have pursued a distinguished career in academic research, a quiet life in a laboratory, but that was not enough. The theories he had studied demanded to be put into practice. The world was about to become his laboratory. And so, in 1937, he made the fateful choice. He joined the Nazi Party. A year later, he entered the black-clad elite, the Schutzstaffel, the SS. The scholar was ready to become an executioner. The journey from the Danube to the ramps of Auschwitz had begun. To understand Josef Mengele's path, we must understand the institution that claimed him. If the Nazi Party was the political engine of the Third Reich, then the Schutzstaffel, or SS, was its soul, a soul as black as their impeccably tailored uniforms, adorned with the chilling insignia of the Death's Head. This was no mere paramilitary group or corps of bodyguards. Under the meticulous, almost mystical direction of Heinrich Himmler, the SS was being forged into a new Teutonic priesthood, a black order of men who were to be the racial and ideological vanguard of the 1,000-year Reich. To join the SS was not simply to enlist, it was to be consecrated into a new faith, one where the holy text was written in the language of blood and soil. For an ambitious man like Mengele, who by 1937 was already a double doctor and steeped in the theories of racial hygiene, the SS was not a detour from his scientific path, but its ultimate destination. It represented the unholy matrimony of ideology and science, the one place where his academic theories could be unleashed from the confines of the lecture hall and applied to the living body of the nation. The SS was not just interested in racial theory, it was its most ruthless practitioner. Its race and settlement main office, known as Russia, was a vast bureaucratic machine dedicated to one purpose: judging the racial value of millions. It was here that the abstract concepts Mengele had studied, cranial measurements, hair color, bloodlines, became the cold, hard currency of life and death. SS officers had to prove their own Aryan purity back to the year 1750. It was applied eugenics on a terrifying scale. This was the emotional hook for men like Mengele. The SS offered the intoxicating promise of turning theory into reality. It presented itself as the greatest scientific enterprise in history, a vast human laboratory dedicated to perfecting a master race. It seduced a generation of German academics, doctors, lawyers, historians, and scientists by offering them a platform where their most radical ideas would not be questioned, but celebrated and funded. In the SS, a doctor was not merely a healer, he was a genetic soldier, a guardian of the people's health, tasked with excising any diseased or inferior elements from the national body. This ideology provided a moral anesthetic, transforming acts of profound cruelty into procedures of racial hygiene. The Hippocratic Oath was rewritten in the stark runes of the SS. The well-being of the collective Aryan body superseded the life of any individual. Mengele, with his handsome features, his flawless academic credentials, and his unwavering belief in the cause, was the perfect candidate for this new order. He was the living embodiment of the SS ideal, the warrior scholar, the man of action and intellect. When he joined the SS in 1938, he was not a jackbooted thug, but a highly valued specialist. He was assigned to the Russia, where he spent his days as a desk-bound expert, reviewing genealogical charts and passing judgment on the racial fitness of candidates. It was here that he honed his gaze, learning to see people not as human beings, but as a collection of desirable or undesirable traits. The man from the ramp in Auschwitz was being formed here, in the quiet, sterile offices of the Nazi bureaucracy, where genocide was planned with the clinical detachment of a scientific study. But the quiet work of internal purification was only the prelude. The ideology that animated the SS was inherently expansionist. Its ultimate vision was not just a pure Germany, but a racially reorganized Europe. The living space, or Lebensraum, promised by Hitler in the East, would be the ultimate testing ground. The coming war would provide an opportunity that no scientist in history had ever dreamed of: an endless supply of human material for research, stripped of all rights and all protection. The laboratory of Germany was about to expand to the size of a continent. For Dr. Mengele, his time as a racial theorist was drawing to a close. The call to battle would soon come, offering him the chance to prove his loyalty not just with a pen, but with a gun. The Eastern Front awaited, a crucible of fire that would burn away the last vestiges of the scholar and forge the angel of death. The ink on his academic papers was barely dry, the sterile quiet of the racial archives still echoing in his ears when the world erupted in fire. In June of 1941, the neat theories of the lecture hall dissolved into the primal chaos of mud and blood as Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, its apocalyptic invasion of the Soviet Union. For the men of the SS, this was not merely a war. It was the ultimate crusade, the violent realization of their worldview. It was a war of annihilation, fought against an enemy deemed not just politically opposed, but biologically subhuman. For Dr. Josef Mengele, the theorist, it was the call to action he had been waiting for. The scholar's coat was shed for the field-gray tunic of a combatant. He volunteered for the Waffen-SS and was sent to the heart of the inferno. He was assigned as a battalion medical officer to the elite 5th SS Panzer Division, Wiking, a unique and formidable formation. Composed largely of foreign volunteers, Scandinavians, Dutch, Finns, and Flemings, it was a microcosm of Himmler's vision for a new, pan-European racial aristocracy united in battle under the German banner. To be sent to Wiking was to be sent to the vanguard. They were thrown into the southern sector of the front, tasked with a relentless drive through Ukraine toward the oil fields of the Caucasus. Here, the war was stripped of all chivalric pretense. It was a brutal slog across the vast, unforgiving ocean of the Russian steppe, fought in the choking dust of summer, the bottomless mud of the Rasputitsa, and the soul-freezing cold of a winter unlike any the Germans had ever known. In this crucible, Mengele was no longer a man of abstract ideas. He was a doctor in hell's antechamber, his hands plunged into the visceral reality of war. His daily work was a litany of horror, patching up shrapnel wounds, amputating frostbitten limbs, and pronouncing death on young men who, just months before, had been hailed as the future of the Aryan race. He saw firsthand the fragility of the master race's flesh, its vulnerability to bullets, disease, and the unforgiving Russian cold. Yet, something unexpected happened here. In the midst of this carnage, Josef Mengele, the future architect of industrial murder, became a hero. This is the most jarring and uncomfortable truth of his story, the emotional hook that snags on our every attempt to dismiss him as a simple monster. In the summer of 1942, during heavy fighting near Rostov-on-Don, Mengele distinguished himself with an act of conspicuous bravery. He is said to have crawled under fire into no man's land to rescue 2 wounded German soldiers from a burning tank, dragging them back to the safety of his own lines. It was an act of selfless courage, the kind that forges legends. For this and other actions, he was awarded the Iron Cross First Class, the Iron Cross Second Class, the Wound Badge, and the Medal for the Care of the German People. He was the very model of an SS warrior, brave, dedicated, and twice decorated. This single act of heroism shines like a shard of broken glass in the dark tapestry of his life, forcing us to ask the terrifying question, how could this man, who risked his life to save 2 comrades, later watch thousands of children walk to their deaths with a detached smile? But fate, in its infinite and cruel irony, had other plans for him. Shortly after his heroic feat, Mengele was severely wounded in action. The exact nature of his injury is lost to the fog of war, but it was serious enough to render him unfit for further combat duty. The path to battlefield glory was now permanently closed to him. The wound was a twist of fate, a dark blessing that would seal the destinies of millions. The SS did not discard its heroes, especially not a highly educated, ideologically pure double doctor who had proven his mettle in the heat of battle. He was a valuable asset. If he could no longer serve the Reich on the front lines, another, more specialized role would be found for him. In the spring of 1943, after his convalescence, Captain Josef Mengele received his new orders. He was being promoted and transferred. His destination was a quiet, obscure Polish town that the Germans called Auschwitz. The angel's baptism by fire was over. His true work was about to begin. On the 30th of May, 1943, SS Hauptsturmführer Dr. Josef Mengele stepped off a train and onto the soil of a place that was not marked on any map of the civilized world. His destination was the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration and extermination camp, a sprawling, meticulously organized universe of its own. This was no makeshift prison. It was a terrifyingly efficient industrial complex, a factory whose raw material was human life and whose finished product was death. The air itself was a thick, greasy soup, heavy with the sweet, sickening odor of burning flesh from the crematoria that worked day and night. The ground was a carpet of gray ash. The soundtrack was a constant, low symphony of misery. The barking of dogs, the shouted commands of guards, the distant, rhythmic weeping that never truly ceased. For the millions who arrived in sealed cattle cars, this was the gate of hell opening. For Josef Mengele, it was a career opportunity. He arrived not as a prisoner, but as a prince to his new domain. His official title was Lagerarzt, camp physician, for the so-called Gypsy family camp at Birkenau. In any other context, this would imply a role of healing and care. In Auschwitz, the word's meaning was inverted into a grotesque parody. The physicians of Auschwitz were not healers. They were sanitarians of death, overseers of the slaughter, tasked with ensuring that the machinery of extermination ran smoothly and without the inconvenient interruption of natural epidemics. But Mengele was not content to be a mere bureaucrat of the abyss. He saw beyond the daily grind of murder. Where others saw a problem to be managed, a tide of humanity to be disposed of, he saw something else entirely: a resource, an unprecedented, limitless resource for the scientific research that burned at the core of his being. His true throne was the Rampe, the long railway platform where the transports disgorged their human cargo. Day and night, the trains arrived, their doors sliding open to reveal a torrent of bewildered humanity. Men, women, and children blinking in the harsh light, starving, terrified, and utterly disoriented after days in suffocating darkness. And there, standing amidst the chaos like a calm, immovable pillar of authority, was Mengele. He was a vision of immaculate order in a world of filth and terror. His SS uniform was perfectly pressed, his boots gleamed, his white gloves were spotless. He often carried a riding crop or a simple swagger stick, which he used not for striking, but for pointing, for deciding. This was the infamous selection. With an imperious flick of a gloved hand, a subtle nod, or a quiet word, left, right, he held the power of God. Those deemed fit for work were sent to one side, granted a temporary reprieve in the form of slave labor. The old, the sick, the frail, and almost all mothers with young children were sent to the other side. They were told they were being taken for a shower and delousing. They were dead within the hour. It is estimated that upwards of 75% of every transport was sent directly to the gas chambers. Mengele performed this duty with a chillingly detached, almost cheerful demeanor. Survivors remember him whistling classical music, a faint, condescending smile playing on his lips. This was not a grim task for him. He had volunteered for ramp duty, often showing up even when he was not on the schedule. This is the crucial emotional hook, the point where his character curdles into something truly monstrous. He was not just following orders, he was pursuing his passion. The ramp was his hunting ground. His sharp, intelligent eyes scanned the terrified crowds with the keen focus of a prospector searching for gold. But he was not looking for able bodies. He was looking for the rare, the unusual, the scientifically interesting. His gaze would light up when he spotted them. Twins. He had an obsessive, insatiable hunger for twins, especially identical children. He would stride forward, his voice suddenly gentle, and pluck them from their mother's arms, promising them special treatment, better food. He was also searching for dwarfs, for people with gigantism, for families with heterochromia, eyes of two different colors, for anyone with a congenital anomaly. He was collecting them. Each transport was a new chance to expand his collection of human oddities, the raw material for the monstrous experiments he planned. The gypsy camp, with its 200,000 entrapped Roma, was his first personal petri dish, a closed population perfect for his studies of heredity and disease. He had arrived. The scholar from the manicured lawns of Günzburg, the decorated hero from the battlefields of the Eastern Front, had found his true laboratory. Here, in the deepest circle of man-made hell, his intellectual ambition and his ideological fervor fused into a singular, terrible purpose. He had been granted absolute power over a population of human beings who had been stripped of all rights, all dignity, and all humanity. It was, to his mind, the greatest scientific opportunity in the history of the world. The angel of death had spread his black wings. Within the sprawling hellscape of Auschwitz, there was a place of even more concentrated horror, a circle of suffering reserved for the damnedest of the damned. To the outside world, it was Block 10 of the main camp and a special barracks at Birkenau. To the children imprisoned there, it had a deceptively gentle name, the Zoo, or the kindergarten. And presiding over this perverse Eden, this playground of pain, was Uncle Mengele. This was the heart of his kingdom, the sanctum sanctorum of his scientific ambition. Here, the charming, smiling doctor from the ramp fully revealed himself as the architect of a new and intimate form of torture, one performed with a syringe and a scalpel in the name of progress. His chosen subjects were the most vulnerable of all, the children, especially the nearly 1,500 pairs of twins he collected with such avaricious zeal. For these children, life under Mengele's care began with a monstrous deception. They were separated from the general camp population, allowed to keep their own clothes and their hair. They received slightly better food rations and were spared the back-breaking labor. Mengele himself would often visit, bringing sweets and toys. He knew their names. He would pat them on the head, ask about their day, and his voice would be a soft, reassuring murmur. The younger children, starved for any semblance of kindness, came to see him as a protector. They called him Uncle. This calculated performance of humanity was his most diabolical tool, a psychological anesthetic administered just before the agony began. It was a lie that made the truth infinitely more terrifying. The research began innocently enough, a grotesque parody of a pediatric examination. Day after day, the twins would be marched to his laboratory, where they would be subjected to hours of excruciatingly detailed measurement. He was a man obsessed with data. Every physical characteristic was noted, cataloged, and compared. The precise shade of their hair, the exact color of their eyes charted against a scale, the length of their limbs, the circumference of their skulls, the distance between their eyes. They were treated like living specimens, human dolls to be posed and measured, their individuality erased and replaced by a series of numbers in his ledger. This was the cold, sterile foundation of his work, the systematic dehumanization of his victims into mere data points. Then came the true experiments. This is the emotional hook where the pretense of science dissolves into pure, unadulterated sadism. The benign measurements gave way to invasive, agonizing procedures performed without anesthetic. His primary obsession was the interplay between genetics and environment, and he used the identical twins as perfect, living test subjects. He would inject one twin with a deadly pathogen, typhus, tuberculosis, pneuma, and leave the other untouched, meticulously charting the progress of the disease and the slow, agonizing death of the infected child. He performed blood transfusions between twins, sometimes with incompatible blood types, watching as their bodies convulsed in fever and pain. He was fixated on eye color, attempting to change brown eyes to the Aryan blue by injecting a rainbow of chemicals and inks directly into the irises of screaming children, often resulting in agonizing pain, infection, and blindness. The list of his atrocities reads like a ghoulish recipe book of suffering. He performed unnecessary surgeries, organ removals, and castrations. He conducted spinal taps and other excruciating procedures simply to see how the twin pairs would react. The laboratory in Block 10 was not a place of healing or discovery. It was a cathedral of pain, and Mengele was its high priest. His assistants would hold the children down as they struggled and screamed, while the doctor, with the steady hand of a seasoned researcher, would make his notes, his face a mask of intense concentration. He was not discovering any secrets of genetics. He was merely documenting the infinite capacity of the human body to endure pain. The final act of this scientific charade was the most horrific of all. The purpose of the twin, in Mengele's methodology, was to provide a perfect control for comparison. The end was always the same. When an experiment reached its conclusion, or when one twin died from an induced disease, the other, healthy twin, was deemed no longer useful. The protocol was invariable. The surviving child would be taken to the infirmary and killed, usually with a direct injection of phenol or chloroform into the heart, a quick and efficient method that preserved the body for dissection. Mengele would then personally conduct the autopsies, laying out the organs of both twins side by side on his table, comparing them with the dispassionate curiosity of a botanist comparing two leaves. These organs, these final silent testaments to his cruelty, were then carefully preserved and shipped back to the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin as valuable scientific material. Out of the approximately 3,000 twins who passed through Mengele's laboratory, only about 200 survived the liberation. Their uncle, the Angel of Death, had consumed the rest, their small bodies rendered down into footnotes for his monstrous research. When the cannons of the Red Army finally blasted open the gates of Auschwitz in January of 1945, the soldiers who entered were not prepared for what they found. They were hardened combat veterans, men who had waded through rivers of blood and witnessed every imaginable form of battlefield horror. But this was different. This was a silent, skeletal kingdom. And in the midst of this kingdom of ghosts, they found the children. Huddled together in their oversized, striped uniforms, they emerged from the barracks not with the joyous cries of the liberated, but with the wide, vacant eyes of the old. Their faces were tiny, ancient masks of trauma. And among them, a special, haunted group, the survivors of Mengele's zoo. They were the living exhibits, the discarded data points, the children who had looked into the face of the Angel of Death and somehow, inexplicably, survived. For them, liberation was not an end to suffering, but the beginning of a different kind of pain. The physical scars were obvious, the stunted growth, the frail bodies, the marks of needles and scalpels. But the true wounds were invisible, etched deep into the architecture of their souls. Their memories, fragmented and feverish, would become their lifelong tormentors. They speak of him not with simple hatred, but with a terrifying, childlike confusion that is far more damning. This is the story's most chilling emotional hook. The survivors do not remember a monster. They remember two men inhabiting one body. They remember the handsome doctor with the kind eyes who offered them a piece of chocolate, and they remember the cold-eyed sadist who strapped them to a table. Listen to their voices, rising like smoke from the ashes of memory. Eva Moses Kor, who along with her twin sister Miriam became one of the most powerful witnesses of this horror, recalled the duality with chilling clarity. She remembered Uncle Mengele and the Dr. Mengele. The first would visit the barracks, immaculately dressed, and ask with genuine interest how they were feeling. The second would strap them to a table and inject them with unknown, agonizing substances. How does a child's mind reconcile this? The man who brought you a toy was the same man who murdered your parents and was now slowly killing you. This psychological vivisection was perhaps his cruelest experiment, creating a wound that could never heal, a permanent fracture in their ability to trust, to love, to believe in any form of goodness. The bond between the twins, which Mengele had sought to exploit, became their only lifeline. They clung to each other, two halves of a single, ravaged soul. They had a secret language of glances and whispers, a shared universe of pain that no one else could enter. They promised each other they would survive. When one twin was taken for an experiment, the other waited in an agony of suspense, knowing the protocol. If one died, the other would be killed for comparison. This knowledge forged a bond deeper than blood, a symbiotic will to live where the survival of one was dependent on the survival of the other. They were each other's only witness, the only other person on earth who knew the truth of what had been done to them in that sterile white room. For the rest of their lives, they carried his shadow within them. They were haunted by phantom pains, mysterious illnesses, and a constant, gnawing anxiety. Many of the girls he experimented on were rendered sterile, a final, cruel twist of the knife from a man obsessed with heredity. They carried his ghost in their nightmares and in their waking hours. Every doctor's office, every needle, every white coat could trigger a cascade of terror, catapulting them back to Block 10. He had not just stolen their childhood, he had colonized their future, leaving behind a poisoned legacy that their bodies and minds would fight for the rest of their days. They are his children, not by blood, but by fire and by pain. They are the few hundred who walked out of his laboratory, their eyes holding a knowledge that no human being should ever possess. They are not merely victims. They are the chief prosecutors in the case against him, their very existence a refutation of his entire ideology. Their survival is an act of defiance, and their voices, decades later, are the ghosts of the thousands who were silenced. They are the last living artifacts of his laboratory, the final, unanswerable evidence of the crimes committed by the smiling doctor from Auschwitz. And while they walked free from the camp, he, their tormentor, was already miles away, beginning a new journey, not to justice, but to freedom. As the winter of 1944 bled into the apocalyptic dawn of 1945, the Thousand-Year Reich was collapsing into a maelstrom of fire and ice. From the east, the Red Army advanced like a vengeful tide, an unstoppable force of steel and fury. From the west, the Allied bombers rained destruction from the skies, turning Germany's proud cities into smoldering necropolises. In this Götterdämmerung, this twilight of the gods, the instinct for survival became the only law. For most at Auschwitz, this meant death marches, starvation, and execution. But for Dr. Josef Mengele, it meant opportunity. On the 17th of January 1945, just 10 days before the Soviets arrived, he did not flee in a panic. He packed. While others scrambled for their lives, Mengele moved with the cold, methodical calm that had defined his entire career. He carefully gathered his precious research, the blood samples, the tissue preparations, the meticulous notebooks filled with measurements and observations from his human experiments. These were not the souvenirs of a madman. To him, they were the fruits of his life's work, invaluable scientific data that had to be preserved at all costs. With his crates of horrors packed and sent ahead, he finally departed, leaving behind the screams and the ashes of his kingdom. His first act of self-preservation was a masterstroke of cynical pragmatism. He shed his black SS uniform, the proud symbol of his authority, like a snake shedding its skin. He donned the anonymous field gray of a common Wehrmacht officer, instantly becoming just another soldier in a defeated army of millions. The angel of death vanished, and in his place was a nameless face in the crowd. He drifted west, a ghost moving through the skeletal remains of Germany. The country had become a vast, chaotic river of humanity flowing away from the front lines. The roads were clogged with retreating soldiers, terrified civilians, and freed slave laborers, all moving in a desperate, directionless surge. This chaos was his greatest ally. In this torrent of anonymity, no one looked twice at a weary, decorated officer making his way home. He was a drop of poison in an ocean of misery, utterly invisible. He briefly attached himself to a Wehrmacht field hospital, his medical skills providing the perfect cover before the final capitulation in May. Germany surrendered. The war was over, and Josef Mengele, one of the most wanted war criminals on the continent, was now simply a German prisoner of war. This is the story's first great moment of injustice, an emotional hook baited with cosmic irony. In June of 1945, Mengele was captured by American forces and interned in a sprawling POW camp near his home region of Bavaria. His name was on a list of wanted war criminals. His face, his rank, his role at Auschwitz were all known, at least in theory. He should have been identified, arrested, and sent to Nuremberg to face the gallows. But he walked free. The Allied bureaucracy, tasked with processing millions of defeated German soldiers, was utterly and completely overwhelmed. The system was a chaotic paper storm, and Mengele slipped through the cracks. His escape was aided by one crucial, defining detail. Heinrich Himmler, in his quest for racial purity, had ordered that all members of the SS have their blood type tattooed under their left arm. It was a mark of honor that, after the war, became an indelible mark of Cain, an undeniable sign of membership in a criminal organization. A simple command, "Raise your arms," was enough to condemn thousands. But Josef Mengele did not have this tattoo. The reasons are unknown. Was it vanity, a refusal to mar his perfect Aryan body? Was it an act of extraordinary foresight, a calculated decision to avoid being marked? Whatever the reason, when the cursory checks were made, his arm was clean. He presented false papers bearing the name Fritz Hollmann. He was just another doctor, another prisoner among a sea of faces. After a few weeks of detainment, the Americans, having failed to identify the angel of death living in their midst, simply released him. He walked out of the camp a free man into the summer sunshine of a defeated but peaceful Germany. The hunt had failed before it had even begun. For 4 years, the angel of death was a ghost haunting the German countryside. After his release from American captivity, Josef Mengele, under a false name, found refuge in the one place no one would think to look, a potato farm near Rosenheim, Bavaria. The man who had held the power of life and death over millions, who had hobnobbed with the intellectual elite of the Reich, now spent his days as a humble farmhand. His hands, once pristine in white gloves as he conducted selections on the ramp, became calloused and stained with the honest dirt of the earth. He lived in a state of suspended animation, a predator lying low, watching and waiting as the world hunted for his former colleagues. The Nuremberg trials were in full swing, and the ghosts of the hanged haunted the imaginations of every fugitive Nazi. The name Mengele was being whispered with increasing frequency in the halls of justice. The farm could not be a permanent sanctuary. He needed to disappear completely. He needed the Rattenlinien, the rat lines. This was the secret architecture of escape, a subterranean railway of salvation for the damned, built in the rubble of the Third Reich. It was a shadowy, informal network of sympathizers, ex-SS comrades, and, most controversially, clergymen within the Catholic Church, most notably the Austrian bishop Alois Hudal in Rome. This network, bound by an umbilical cord of gold and ideology, provided fugitive Nazis with money, shelter, and, most importantly, the documents needed to cross borders and oceans. For a man like Mengele, whose wealthy and powerful family was desperate to protect him, this network was the only path to a new life. In 1949, the decision was made. The farmhand would vanish. and a new man would be born. His journey was a masterclass in clandestine movement. Financed by his family, he slipped across the border from Germany into Austria, moving from safe house to safe house. From there, he began the arduous trek south, traversing the snow-choked alpine passes of the Brenner Pass into Italy. This was the same route Hannibal had taken with his elephants, a timeless passage of escape and invasion. For Mengele, it was a journey from a continent that wanted his neck to a continent that would offer him sanctuary. He was just another refugee in a stream of displaced persons, his face obscured by a thick beard, his past hidden behind a new name, Helmut Gregor. Italy was the rat line's central station, and the port city of Genoa was its main departure terminal. And it was here, in the chaotic aftermath of war, that Mengele received his golden ticket, the single most important document of his escape. This is the story's most sickening emotional hook, a moment of profound, bureaucratic irony. His passport to freedom was a travel document issued by the International Committee of the Red Cross. This great humanitarian organization, overwhelmed by the task of repatriating millions of stateless refugees, had a system that was tragically easy to exploit. With a letter of recommendation from a sympathetic contact, often a local priest, and a plausible story, one could obtain legitimate papers under a false identity. For Helmut Gregor, this was a simple transaction, the ultimate perversion, a document of humanitarian mercy being used to shield a merchant of merciless death. With his Red Cross passport and a visa for Argentina secured by the network, the way was clear. The sea voyage was a baptismal crossing. As the ship, the North King, steamed away from the shores of Europe, it carried Mengele away from the ruins of his past. He was leaving behind the continent of his crimes, the ashes of Auschwitz, the ghosts of the children he had murdered. He was sailing toward a new world, a new life, a new name. In 1949, Helmut Gregor stepped ashore in Buenos Aires. He breathed in the warm air of a city that was, under the populist regime of President Juan Perón, famously hospitable to former Nazis. The hunt was over. The escape was complete. He had made it. The ghosts of Europe were on the other side of the ocean, and Josef Mengele, the angel of death, was free. Buenos Aires, in the 1950s, was a city of vibrant, intoxicating life. It was a metropolis of tango and steak, of European elegance and Latin passion, a place where the past could be easily shed and a new future invented. For Helmut Gregor, it was the perfect camouflage. He dissolved into the city's large and prosperous German community, a world within a world where German was spoken in the cafes, German newspapers were read, and the old allegiances were never far from the surface. For the first time in years, Josef Mengele could breathe. He worked first as a carpenter, then as a sales representative for his family's farm equipment company. He lived a life of quiet, bourgeois anonymity. The man who had once held dominion over a kingdom of death was now just another immigrant trying to make his way in a new land. The normalcy of it all is the most profound horror. He was not alone. Perón's Argentina was a veritable Noah's Ark for the architects of the Third Reich. He was surrounded by his own kind. Adolf Eichmann, the logistical mastermind of the Holocaust, lived nearby under the name Ricardo Clement. Hans Ulrich Rudel, Hitler's most decorated pilot, was a celebrated figure in the community. They formed a tight-knit circle of denial and mutual protection, a society of ghosts clinging to the wreckage of their ideology. In this insulated world, Mengele was not a monster to be feared, but a comrade to be sheltered. This sense of security, combined with the world's apparent amnesia, made him bold. The fear that had driven him across the Alps began to evaporate under the warm Argentinian sun. And then came the act of breathtaking arrogance, the emotional hook that defies all logic and justice. In 1956, Feeling utterly secure, he decided that Helmut Gregor was no longer necessary. He walked into a government office in Buenos Aires and, using his birth certificate, sent from Germany by his family, obtained an official Argentinian identity card in his own name, Josef Mengele. The mask was off, but the audacity did not stop there. A short time later, he walked into the West German embassy in Buenos Aires. He presented his Argentinian ID and calmly requested a new German passport. The bureaucracy of the new democratic Germany, in a moment of staggering incompetence or indifference, reviewed his documents and issued him a brand new, valid West German passport. The Angel of Death was now an officially recognized citizen, free to travel the world, his identity confirmed and sanctioned by the very nation in whose name he had committed his crimes. With his identity restored, he embraced his new life with vigor. The family fortune flowed from Günzburg, allowing him to become a part owner of a pharmaceutical company. He was a respectable businessman. He also decided to rebuild his personal life. His first wife, Irene, who had remained in Germany, had never truly shared his fanaticism and refused to join him in his exile. They divorced. But Mengele would not be a bachelor for long. In a move of almost novelistic strangeness, he married his brother Karl's widow, Martha. After his younger brother died, Mengele began a relationship with his sister-in-law. Now, he brought her and her young son, his own nephew, to Argentina to live with him. The picture was now complete. Dr. Josef Mengele, the butcher of Auschwitz, was a husband and a stepfather. The man who had torn thousands of children from their mother's arms now sat at the dinner table, helping his new stepson with his homework. The man whose experiments had destroyed countless families now had one of his own. He lived in a nice house in a prosperous suburb. He went to work, he paid his bills, he attended social functions. There are no accounts of him being haunted by nightmares, no tales of a man tormented by guilt. By all appearances, he was content. He was a survivor, a success story. He had gambled against fate and won. But while he played the part of the unassuming family man, the gears of vengeance, though grinding slowly, had begun to turn. In the shadows, a new kind of hunter was picking up the scent. The quiet life was built on borrowed time. The comfortable bubble of Mengele's life in Buenos Aires, so carefully constructed from lies and laundered money, was always fragile. It was a phantom existence, vulnerable to the faintest whisper from the past. In 1959, that whisper became a roar. After years of pressure from prosecutors and survivors, the West German government, finally awakening from its bureaucratic slumber, issued an official arrest warrant for Dr. Josef Mengele for his crimes at Auschwitz. The document, transmitted through diplomatic channels to Argentina, was a death knell for his quiet life. The name that he had so brazenly reclaimed now became a brand, marking him for capture. A cold serpent of fear, long dormant, uncoiled in his gut. It was time to run again. His escape from Argentina was swift and decisive, a testament to the efficiency of the network that still protected him. He slipped across the border into the shadowy embrace of Paraguay, a nation then ruled by the iron-fisted dictator Alfredo Stroessner, a man whose German heritage and authoritarian sympathies made his country a haven for Nazi fugitives. Here, Mengele found not just refuge, but official sanction. He was granted Paraguayan citizenship in 1959. He had burrowed deeper into the belly of South America, wrapping himself in the legal armor of a new nationality. For a time, it seemed he had once again outrun the ghosts. But then, in May of 1960, a lightning bolt struck from a clear sky. In a daring operation that would become the stuff of intelligence legend, a team of agents from Mossad, Israel's formidable intelligence agency, descended on a quiet street in Buenos Aires. They snatched a balding, unassuming man named Ricardo Clement from his home, drugged him, and smuggled him out of the country on an El Al flight. That man was Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the final solution. The capture sent a seismic shockwave through the fugitive Nazi communities of South America. It was a terrifying proclamation. The past was not dead, and the reach of the avenging angels from the new Jewish state was long. For Mengele, the message was personal. They had come for his neighbor. They would surely come for him next. And they did. The Eichmann operation was not a singular act of revenge. It was the opening salvo. Flushed with success, the leader of Mossad, Yasser Harel, made capturing Mengele his next great obsession. The hunt was on in earnest. Mossad agents, ghosts from the nation of ghosts, poured into South America. They picked up the trail, their informants leading them from the German cafes of Buenos Aires to the remote, isolated colonies of Paraguay. They located him. For a time, they had the angel of death in their sights. They watched his movements, studied his habits, and planned his capture. The net was closing. It seemed that justice, so long delayed, was finally imminent. This was the moment, the climax of the hunt, the point where the world held its breath. Then, nothing. The net was inexplicably pulled back. The hunters vanished. Mengele, who had been living in a state of paranoid terror, was left untouched. This failure to capture him when he was within their grasp is the central, agonizing tragedy of the hunt for Josef Mengele. This is the emotional hook that twists the knife of injustice. There was no single reason, but a confluence of cruel political realities. The Eichmann capture had created a massive diplomatic firestorm with Argentina, and repeating such a bold move was deemed too risky. More critically, Mossad's attention was diverted to what was considered a more immediate existential threat. German scientists, many of them former Nazis, who were helping Gamal Abdel Nasser's Egypt develop a sophisticated missile program aimed at Israel. The choice was brutal and pragmatic. The life of a single monster from the past was weighed against the future security of the state. The past lost. Resources were reallocated. The team hunting Mengele was disbanded. Terrified by the Eichmann affair and unaware of his good fortune, Mengele descended deeper into the shadows than ever before. He became a true phantom, flitting between remote farmhouses in Paraguay and Brazil, his movements shrouded in secrecy. His world shrank to a small circle of die-hard Nazi sympathizers who provided him with shelter and money, most notably the Stammer family, who housed him for years on their farm in Brazil. He became a bitter, angry, and pathetic figure, railing against the world, but utterly dependent on the charity of others. As the years turned into decades, the real, aging man withered away while his myth grew. He became the ultimate Nazi bogeyman, the subject of sensationalist novels and films, a symbol of pure, uncaptured evil. The hunters, both professional and amateur, continued the search, but they were always one step behind, chasing a ghost. The trail had gone cold, and the angel of death, now a lonely old man, was left to drift toward his own private end. The legend of Josef Mengele outlived the man. Growing more potent and monstrous with each passing year, he remained at large. While the world imagined him as a criminal mastermind living in a fortified jungle compound, the reality was far more pathetic. The handsome, imperious doctor from the Auschwitz ramp had withered into a decrepit, angry old man. He was a shuffling ghost, haunted not by guilt, but by the terror of discovery, his days a monotonous cycle of fear and boredom, his nights filled with bitter, self-pitying scribblings in his journals. He had escaped the hangman's noose only to be condemned to a prison of his own making, a life sentence of paranoid obscurity. He was a king in exile with no kingdom left but the cluttered rooms of his memory. The end, when it came, was not dramatic. It was mundane. It was accidental. It was a final, cosmic insult to the millions who craved justice. On the 7th of February, 1979, Josef Mengele, then living under the name Wolfgang Gerhard, went for a swim. It was a beautiful day on a sun-drenched beach in the coastal resort of Bertioga, Brazil. He waded into the warm, indifferent waters of the Atlantic, the same ocean that had carried him to freedom 30 years earlier. The man who had sent multitudes to their deaths with a flick of his wrist was now just another aging tourist enjoying the surf. It was not a bullet from an assassin's rifle or the cold steel of a commando's knife that finally found him. It was a rebellion from within. As he swam, a sudden, catastrophic failure occurred in the biological machine he had so arrogantly sought to master. He suffered a massive stroke. His body, the vessel of so much evil, betrayed him. He lost control, gasped for air, and inhaled the salt water. The man who had presided over an empire of fire and ash drowned in 3 feet of water. His death was a small, quiet, lonely event, witnessed by no one who knew his true name. His body was pulled from the surf, a waterlogged corpse of an anonymous old man. The angel of death had fallen, but no one heard him land. This is the final, agonizing, emotional hook of the story. His death was a secret. His loyal protectors, the Stammer family, buried him in a cemetery near Sao Paulo under his borrowed name, Wolfgang Gerhard. The deception was complete. For 6 more years, the world continued to hunt a man who was already dust. The myth of Mengele, the elusive phantom, lived on, a source of endless fascination and fear. Rewards for his capture climbed into the millions of dollars, but the hunters were chasing a ghost. The truth finally began to emerge in 1985, when German investigators, acting on a long-awaited tip, raided the home of a family friend in Germany and found letters revealing Mengele's death and the location of his grave. An international team of forensic experts from Germany, Israel, and the United States descended on the small Brazilian cemetery. They were a new kind of hunter, armed not with guns, but with the tools of science. They exhumed the body from the pauper's grave. They were no longer hunting a man. They were dissecting a death. The forensic examination was meticulous. They analyzed the skeleton, compared the teeth to Mengele's wartime dental records, and discovered evidence of the injuries he had sustained on the Eastern Front. Finally, in a moment of surreal confrontation with the past, Mengele's own son, Rolf, who had secretly visited his father in Brazil years before, was brought in. He confirmed the story. The skeleton in the dirt was him. The hunt was over, but there was no satisfaction in this discovery, no catharsis, no thunderclap of righteous victory. There was only the hollow, unsettling silence of a cheated reckoning. The world had been denied its final act. There would be no trial, no testimony, no confession from the dock at Nuremberg. There would be no final, defiant snarl or pathetic plea for mercy. There was only a box of bones, the last mute remnants of a life of unimaginable evil. He had escaped. In the only way that truly mattered, he had won. The angel of death was never brought to justice by man. He was simply recalled by nature, his monstrous life ending not with a judgment, but with a gasp, swallowed by the vast, unfeeling sea.